Hello and welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about Zuko and specifically about the word he keeps saying, honor. He says it constantly. He says it when he's angry, which is most of the time, and he says it when he's pleading, and he says it to people who have no idea what he's on about. And the strange thing, the thing I keep coming back to, is that he means something quite specific by it, something a moral philosopher would recognise and probably want to argue with him about. So that's where we're going. The word and how badly he's got it wrong, and the 3 seasons it takes him to work that out. We'll get into the tea, obviously. The dragons, the scar, his sister, who I have a lot of opinions about. Where any of these ideas came from in the first place, because a Nickelodeon cartoon in 2005 had no business being this well read. If you've enjoyed these before, and you fancy sticking around, a subscribe helps more than you'd think. Otherwise, settle in. There's no rush on this one. Let's start with the word. Picture the war room. Zuko is 13. He's been allowed in, which is already a bit of a milestone. The Crown Prince finally sitting at the grown-ups table, keeping quiet, watching how the Empire actually gets run. And a general stands up and proposes something. The plan is to use an entire division of Fire Nation soldiers as bait. Not to send them somewhere risky, to spend them. They're the cost of the manoeuvre, and the manoeuvre works because they die. Zuko objects. That's it. That's the whole offence. He speaks up in a room where the rule is that you don't speak up, and he says a thing that any decent person would say, which is that those are our own men, and you can't just hand them over, and the response from his father is not to disagree with him. Ozai doesn't say, "You're wrong about the tactics, son." He says that Zuko has been disrespectful in a war chamber and must answer for it in an Agni Kai, a firebending duel. Here's the part that always gets me. Zuko agrees. He agrees because he thinks he's fighting the general. He's 13 and he's confident, and he assumes the man he insulted is the man he'll be facing. And then he walks out onto the dueling ground, turns around, and it's his dad standing there. The realization is instant, and it's total. He drops to his knees and he begs. And begging in Ozai's reading is a second offence, cowardice, on top of insolence, and so Ozai burns the left side of his face and banishes him and gives him a task designed to be impossible. Find the Avatar. Nobody's seen the Avatar in 100 years. Off you go. Now, sit with what happened there for a second, because it's worth being precise about it. Zuko was punished for having a conscience, not for a mistake, not for a strategic error, not for being wrong. He was punished because he cared about people the Empire had already written off. And the punishment was framed explicitly in the language everyone in that room accepted, as a matter of honour. Zuko had dishonoured his father. The burn restored the balance, so the word gets welded onto the worst day of his life, in the wrong shape, and he carries that shape around for years. Because here's what Zuko thinks honour is. Honour, in his head, is a thing other people hold. It's an account, and the account is held by someone else, and they can debit it and credit it, and you can only watch. Ozai took it. Ozai can give it back. And the only route back to a positive balance is a specific transaction. Capture the Avatar, hand him over, receive your honour. Which means Zuko's entire goal for the first stretch of this show is not an achievement. It's a performance. It only works if somebody's watching. There's no version of capturing Aang where Zuko does it quietly, feels good about it, and goes home satisfied. The whole point is that it has to be witnessed and validated by the one man whose validation is the thing he's actually chasing. And there is a completely different definition of the word sitting right there the whole time, which he can't see. Honour as something you just have, something that lives in you and isn't affected by who's in the room. If you have it and nobody claps, you still have it. If you lose it, no ceremony gives it back. You have to go and do the thing that gets it back. And even then it's yours, not a gift. Philosophers have a rough way of splitting this. Some cultures run on shame, some run on guilt. Shame is about the eyes on you. It's what happens when you're seen falling short. Guilt is about the thing itself. It's what happens when you know you fell short. Whether or not the room noticed, neither one is a superior model, whatever anyone tells you. They just fail in different directions. A shame system will keep you in line beautifully, right up until nobody's looking. A guilt system will grind you into powder over things nobody else even clocked. Zuko is running on pure shame, and he doesn't know there's another setting. You can see it in how he behaves when he's alone versus how he behaves in company. Alone, he's actually not bad. He's a bit dramatic, sure, but the moment there's an audience, his crew, Zhao, Iroh, anyone, the performance starts. Chin up. Voice hard. My honor, my throne, my destiny. He's not talking to them. He's rehearsing for his dad. And here's a fun detail that I think about more than is reasonable. Zuko almost didn't exist. The show's creators, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, had built this world where Fire Lord Ozai was going to be the villain. Which is fine, except a villain sitting on a throne on the other side of the map isn't much use week to week. It was an executive producer, Eric Coleman, who pointed out that they needed somebody actually chasing Team Avatar. Somebody in the room. And the original idea was that this someone would be an adult, a proper grown-up antagonist. Coleman was the one who pushed for a kid instead. A really driven kid is how it's been described. And then Konietzko asked whether he could have a scar. That's the whole origin. A producer says he should be young, an artist says, can he have a scar? And out falls one of the most argued about characters in television. Coleman got nicknamed the Godfather of Zuko for it, which I think is genuinely lovely. He'd never have written a line of that arc, and he made the whole thing possible by asking for a teenager instead of a man. But think about what the age does to the philosophy. An adult Zuko chasing the Avatar to restore his honor is a stock character. He's a tragic soldier, he's a Javert, we've seen him. A 13-year-old who got burned for objecting to a war crime, and who concluded from that experience that the problem was him, that's something else entirely. Because a 13-year-old doesn't have the equipment to think, my father is a monster, and the value system in this room is broken. That's an enormous thought. That's the kind of thought that takes most adults a decade of quiet misery to arrive at. What a 13-year-old thinks is, I got it wrong, I'll do better. Tell me the task and I'll do the task. So the definition of honor he's carrying isn't a philosophical position he arrived at. It's an injury he mistook for a lesson. And the show, this is the part I really admire, never sits him down and explains it. Nobody in 3 seasons goes, actually Zuko, you've conflated honor with your father's approval, and here's a more coherent framework. There's no speech. There's no wise old man laying it out on a chalkboard. He has to grind his way to it over dozens of episodes, mostly by trying his own version and watching it not work, which is, if we're honest, how anybody actually changes their mind about anything. Nobody's ever been argued out of a bad definition. You just live inside it long enough for the cracks to show. And here's a fun detail about the task itself, which I think is the cruelest thing in the show, and gets treated as a footnote. Ozai did sentence him to exile. Not technically. He gave him a condition: find the Avatar and come home. Which sounds, on the face of it, like mercy. There's a door, there's a way back. All you have to do is walk through it. Except nobody had seen the Avatar in 100 years. Most people had stopped believing there was one. The air nomads were gone, the Avatar cycle had apparently broken, and the Fire Nation had spent a century looking with the full resources of an empire and found nothing. So what Ozai actually handed his son was a life sentence dressed up as a quest. He wasn't giving him a chance. He was giving him a job that would keep him at sea until he died, while allowing everyone at court to say that the Fire Lord had been generous. That's an elegant piece of cruelty, and it works because it's legible. It reads as fair, and Zuko takes it, and he takes it seriously. and he spends 3 years actually doing it, which is the detail that breaks my heart every time. He didn't sulk, he didn't drift, he went and looked. 3 years of maps and rumours and dead ends, of interrogating villagers, of chasing sightings that were always nothing, on a rusting boat with a crew who thought he was mad, and then he actually finds him, which nobody expected, least of all his dad. Ozai wrote a sentence and the boy went and completed it, and I've often wondered what that did to the man's face when word came in. There's a version of the ship crew worth mentioning too, because it's easy to miss. Those men are not his friends. They're not loyal retainers. They're a punishment detail. An exiled prince's staff is not opposing anyone requests, and Zuko treats them accordingly, which is to say badly. He shouts. He demands. He doesn't learn their names on screen, and there's a scene where he's rude to them and Iroh is warm to them in the same minute. And you can see the whole thesis of the show in the gap between the two men, because Zuko can't be decent to those men. Not because he's a snob, though he is a bit of a snob. It's because being decent to them buys him nothing. There's no honour to be gained from kindness to a crew of nobodies who will never speak to his father. His entire moral system is a transaction ledger, and the crew are not on it, so they don't exist. And then there's Zhao, who I've always thought is the most useful character in the first season for exactly this reason. Zhao is what Zuko is trying to be, and he's horrible. He's ambitious, he's decorated, he's got the ships and the rank and the approval, and he plays the honour game fluently. He challenges Zuko to an Agni Kai in front of an audience, all ceremony, all form, everything correct, and Zuko beats him. And then, on the ground, having lost, Zhao spits at him to finish it, and Zuko doesn't, and walks away, and Zhao attacks his back the second he turns. And Iroh catches the man's ankle, and says the line that Zhao never recovers from. Even in exile, his nephew is more honourable than Zhao will ever be. That's the show telling you, in Season 1, what the answer is. It's right there. The man with the title, and the fleet, and the medals, has no honour. The banished kid with the burned face has it, and doesn't know, and would give it all away tomorrow for a nod from his father. Zuko hears that sentence, and it does absolutely nothing to him. He's standing right there, he's in the scene. And it slides straight off because you cannot hear a thing like that until you're ready to, and he's got about 40 episodes left before he is. Anyway, let's talk about where any of this came from, because a cartoon on Nickelodeon in the mid-2000s pulling this off is not something that just happens. Two blokes met at art school in Rhode Island in the 90s. That's the origin, and I love how unglamorous it is. Michael Dante DiMartino was studying animation, Brian Konietzko was doing illustration. They found out they liked the same things: big fantasy stories, Japanese animation, old kung fu films, and, more usefully for our purposes, Eastern philosophy. Not in an academic way. In the way you like something when you're 22 and you've read a few books and you want to make something out of it. DiMartino ended up directing on Family Guy in Los Angeles and got Konietzko a job there too, which is a sentence I enjoy enormously. The two men who would go on to build a meditative fantasy epic about balance and reincarnation, cutting their teeth on cutaway gags. And when they finally got to make their own thing, the influences went in more or less unfiltered. The 4 elements. The Avatar is a figure who returns over and over to put the world back in balance. That's Hindu in shape. The air nomads, as Tibetan Buddhist monks, monasteries on mountaintops, pacifism, the whole thing. They've joked about being 2 white American blokes doing this, and I'll come back to that because it's a fair thing to raise, and I'd rather raise it myself than pretend it isn't there. But here's the detail that tells you they weren't just decorating. They hired a martial artist. Sifu Kisu of the Harmonious Fist Chinese Athletic Association was brought in to design the bending, and not as a general consultant who nods at storyboards. The brief was that each of the 4 bending arts had to be a different real style with different logic, so that a person who knows Kung Fu could look at any frame, and tell you what they were watching. Waterbending got Tai Chi, earthbending got Hungar, all rooted stances and immovability. Airbending got Bagua, circular and evasive, and firebending got Northern Shaolin, long range, aggressive, explosive, all forward pressure. Now you could file that under nice production detail and move on. I don't think you can actually, because the martial art is doing philosophy. Northern Shaolin is a style built on committing forward. There's no waiting in it, and that's the element they gave to the nation that spent 100 years deciding that the answer to everything is more force, applied faster. Zuko fights like an argument he's already decided to win. Watch him early on. He's technically excellent, and he's also relentless, and there's no listening in any of it. Compare that to Iroh, who fights the same element and looks like he's doing something else entirely, because he is, and we'll get to that. The point is that the character's psychology and the character's kung fu are the same thing, viewed from two angles. That doesn't happen by accident. Somebody sat down and thought about it. Here's another one, and this one's from the horse's mouth. There was a thing called Avatar Extras, where Nickelodeon re-aired episodes with little pop-up facts on screen, behind-the-scenes trivia mostly, some of it silly, and in the extras for an episode in the second season, they dropped a note saying that Zuko, no longer a sheltered prince, now living rough as a refugee, was on a journey reflecting the experiences of the Buddha. That's not a fan theory, that's the show telling you, and once you've heard it you can't unhear it, because the shape does match. A prince, raised inside a palace, insulated from the world by design, who ends up outside the walls, hungry, anonymous, watching ordinary people suffer for the first time in his life, and who works out, slowly, badly, with a lot of relapses, that the thing he was chasing was never going to deliver what he thought it would. Now, I want to be careful here, because Zuko is the Buddha is obviously not the claim. Zuko is a furious teenager who commits several war crimes and steals from a family who fed him. What's borrowed is the shape, the palace, the departure, the suffering, the reframe. It's a structure, not a sermon. Nobody in this show sits down and teaches the Four Noble Truths. They just laid the frame underneath a kid with a bad attitude and let it hold. Right, a lighter one, because I've gone a bit heavy. The blue spirit mask. You know the one? Pale face, blue, big grin, deeply unsettling. That design comes from a Dragon King mask out of Chinese Nuo opera, which is a real tradition going back a very long way, and a Dragon King in that context is a water deity. So Zuko, Prince of the Fire Nation, chooses a water spirit as his secret identity. I've no idea whether that was deliberate. I choose to believe it was. And the reason it's blue? Practical, purely practical. The creators reckoned that if they made it red, the audience would clock who was under the mask in about 4 seconds. Red equals Fire Nation. Done. Mystery over. So it's blue because red would have been a spoiler. That's it. One of the most iconic pieces of design in the show exists in that colour, because of a plot problem. I find that reassuring. Honestly, half of art is somebody solving a boring problem and accidentally making the best thing in the room. Now the awkward bit, because I said I'd get to it and I'd rather not be the sort of person who skips it. This is a show built almost entirely out of Asian and indigenous cultures, made by 2 white Americans, and people have been arguing about that since roughly the day it aired. There's a piece in Tricycle, which is a Buddhist magazine, so not exactly a hostile outlet, that lays it out fairly. The show broke real ground by centering Asian identities in Western children's media at a time when basically nothing else was. And the creators have also drawn criticism for appropriating those cultures, from the clothing to the character names. Viewers are split on it, genuinely split, not split in the way where everyone secretly agrees. I'm not going to hand you a verdict on that, partly because I don't think I'm the right person to, and partly because I don't think there's one available. What I'll say is that the argument is more interesting than the usual version of this argument, because the usual version is about a work that borrowed a surface, aesthetic borrowing. Costumes and squiggly fonts. That's not what happened here. The idea's load bare. If you pulled the Taoism out of Iroh, there's no Iroh. If you pulled the reincarnation out of the Avatar, there's no premise. If you pulled Northern Shaolin out of firebending, Zuko fights like nobody in particular. You can't strip this show back to a neutral fantasy skeleton with some Asian paint on it, because there is no skeleton underneath. The borrowed material is the skeleton. Whether that makes it better or worse is exactly the argument people are having, and both sides are making a real point. Doing it seriously means doing it deeply, and doing it deeply means you're now very far inside something that isn't yours. There's no clean position available. There rarely is. What I'll allow myself is this. The show is curious, relentlessly curious, and slightly overqualified for its own time slot. There's a version of this project that reads 3 Wikipedia pages and calls it a day, and that version got made about 400 times in the 2000s, and none of those shows are being analysed 20 years later by people who should be asleep. A couple more production bits, since we're here, and they're good ones. The names. They're not decorative. Zuko's name is written in Chinese characters. In the show, there's an episode where the title card for his segment gives it as 2 characters, and the whole cast is like this quietly, in the background of shots. The Fire Nation's writing is real writing. The signs in Ba Sing Se say things. If you can read Chinese, you're getting an entire second layer of this program for free. And if you can't, you'd never know it was there, which is exactly the right way to do it. They didn't put it in for credit. They put it in because it would have been wrong not to. The architecture as well. The Sun Warrior ruins are built like Southeast Asian Hindu-Buddhist temple complexes. That's the visual reference, and it's doing the same job the Kung Fu does. The place reads as sacred before anyone says a word about it, because it's borrowing the visual grammar of places that actually are. And there's a thing about how this show was made that I think explains the whole quality problem, which is that it had a proper writer's room, and the room argued. That's rarer than it sounds in animation. A lot of shows of this era were assembled, episodes farmed out, continuity managed by a Bible, nobody in charge of whether it added up. Avatar had a head writer and a group of people who thought about it. There are podcast episodes where the writers talk about the arguments now, 20 years later, still slightly annoyed, and you can hear that the fights were real ones. About who ends up with whom. About whether a character had earned a turn. About what the show was actually saying. You can tell. You can always tell. A show made by people who agree is smooth and dead. A show made by people who argue has friction in it. And friction is the thing you're actually watching. Fun fact that I enjoy disproportionately. This thing aired on Nickelodeon between shows about talking sponges. That was its neighbourhood. Somebody at a network approved a 4-minute segment where nothing happens except an old man buys a picnic basket and grieves, and it went out on a Friday between adverts for a toy. I have no idea how that got through. I suspect the answer is that nobody senior was watching very closely, which is how most good art gets made. Anyway, speaking of overqualified, let's talk about the old man with the T. Start with the T because everything about Iroh starts with the T. He is on paper a retired general. He's the older brother of the man running an empire, and what he does in nearly every scene is offer somebody a hot drink. He offers it to his nephew, who slaps it away. He offers it to strangers. He offers it to people who are actively hunting him. There's a moment where he drinks something brewed from a wild plant because he thought it might be tea, and finds out it's a very bad idea when it leaves him covered in a rash. The show makes the consequences gloriously obvious. It reads as comedy. It reads as an old man with a hobby. It is not that at all. Here's the number that reframes him. Iroh laid siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days. Not 600 days of skirmishing, 600 days of pressing on the greatest fortified city in the world. A city that had held against everything the Fire Nation had thrown at it for the length of the entire war. And he did what no commander in history had done. He breached the outer wall. First man ever. He was the Dragon of the West, and he was, by every measure his civilization had, at the summit of everything a person could achieve. And then his son died. Lu Ten was killed on the front lines, before the inner wall came down. And Iroh, a man who had a vision, early in life, that he would be the one to take that city, stopped, packed up, went home. The siege ended not because it failed militarily, but because the man running it no longer wanted the thing at the end of it. And when he got back, his father Azulon was succeeded by Ozai instead of him. The firstborn son, the war hero, the heir, passed over, partly because he'd walked away from the army, partly because his little brother moved on the opening the moment it appeared. So Iroh loses his son, his throne, and his purpose in roughly that order. And what he does with the rest of his life is make tea and give advice to a teenager who doesn't want it. That is the whole reason he's credible. Because if a random monk turns up and tells Zuko that the throne isn't worth it, Zuko can dismiss him. Easy. You don't understand, old man. You've never had anything. But Iroh isn't that. Iroh never went and got it. Iroh got closer to it than any human being in the history of that war, and he can tell you exactly what it's worth, because he paid the full price and received the receipt. He's not preaching from the outside. He's a man who's been to the destination and come back to tell you what's actually there. And what's actually there, in Iroh's account, is a hill in Ba Sing Se, where he sits down and sings to his dead boy. That's from the Tales of Ba Sing Se episode, a lovely, strange, quiet half-hour made of little vignettes. Momo's is the last one. He wanders through a market, he buys some odds and ends, he helps a crying child, he talks a mugger out of it, he does small kindnesses to people whose names we never learn. And you're watching it thinking, right, this is a nice little day in the life. And then he climbs a hill, sets down what he's been carrying, and it's a shrine. It's Lu Ten's birthday. He'd been shopping for a memorial the whole time. That segment ends with a dedication card in honour of Mako. Mako Iwamatsu voiced Iroh, and he died of esophageal cancer in July 2006, partway through the show's run. So the episode where Iroh sits on a hill and grieves his son is also the episode where the crew grieves the man who'd been giving him a voice. I'm not going to do anything clever with that. It's just true, and I think it's worth knowing when you watch it. Now, the philosophy of the man. Iroh is the most Taoist thing in this show by a distance, and the giveaway isn't the tea or the beard. It's what he does when Zuko is wrong, which is almost nothing. Zuko is wrong constantly. Zuko is wrong in ways that are dangerous, that get people hurt, that are obviously going to blow up in his face, and Iroh, who knows exactly how it's going to end, does not stop him. He'll offer a proverb, he'll offer a metaphor about the swamp or the lotus or, more often than not, tea again. And then he'll let the boy go and do the stupid thing. That looks like passivity. It looks honestly like negligence. I've seen people argue that Iroh's a bad guardian, and I understand the argument, but it's not passivity. It's a specific idea about how change happens, and it comes out of the Taoist notion of not forcing, wu wei if you want the term. The rough shape of it is that the more you shove, the more the thing shoves back, and that water beats stone not by hitting harder, but by being patient and shapeless, and absolutely refusing to stop. Iroh cannot argue Zuko out of the definition of honour he's carrying, because that definition isn't an argument, it's a wound. You can't reason someone out of a wound. All you can do is stay nearby and stay warm and be there when they finally turn around and want to talk. So he stays, year after year, on a rubbish little ship, then as a refugee, then as a fugitive, then behind a counter in a tea shop, and at every point he could have left and had a much nicer life. That's what the tea is. It's not a hobby, It's the only tool he's got that works, and the strategy is objectively terrible, by the way. If you graded Iroh as a guardian on outcomes, he'd fail. His nephew commits several atrocities on his watch. There's an entire season where the situation gets worse, not better, and it gets worse in a way Iroh very clearly saw coming and let happen anyway. He's not a wise man who fixes things. He's a wise man who declines to fix things on principle and pays for it. I've gone back and forth on whether that's admirable. Some days I think it's the single most patient act of love in the whole series. Other days I think, mate, just say the words. Say the actual words to him. He's a child. I've settled somewhere in the middle, which is that Iroh knows something I don't like knowing, which is that being told doesn't work. You can hand someone the correct answer, fully formed, and they will nod and then go and do the wrong thing anyway, because the answer has to be arrived at, or it doesn't stick. It has to cost something. Iroh's method looks like doing nothing because, from the outside, patience always looks like doing nothing. And the man gives dreadful, tactical advice throughout, which is my favourite running feature of the show. Zuko's chasing the Avatar in a blizzard, and Iroh suggests they stop for a nap. There's a war on, and Iroh wants to look at some ruins. The city's still under Earth Kingdom control, and Iroh's opening a business. Every single time, the advice is objectively unhelpful, and every single time, it turns out to have been the right call, because Iroh's playing a different game than the one on the board. And here's a fun detail about the tea shop that I think is the best joke in the series. Iroh, fugitive, hiding in the enemy's capital city under a false name, gets a job in a tea shop. And he's so good at it that he gets promoted. And then he's so good at that word spreads. And a wealthy man offers to set him up with his own place. And Iroh, a wanted war criminal, the most hunted man in the Earth Kingdom, hiding, accepts. Because it's a nice offer, and he likes tea. He opens the Jasmine Dragon. It becomes the most talked about tea house in Ba Sing Se. He is, functionally, a celebrity in the city he once besieged, under a rubbish disguise, because he could not stop himself being good at the thing he loves. That's not a plot hole, that's the character. Iroh cannot do a small life. He's constitutionally incapable of hiding, because hiding requires you to withhold yourself from people, and he doesn't have that setting. He'd rather be caught than be miserable, and he very nearly is caught several times entirely because of it, and Zuko finds this unbearable. That's the running tension of that whole stretch. His uncle is happy, genuinely, visibly happy, serving drinks in an apron in a city they were meant to be conquering, and Zuko is stood next to him, grinding his teeth into powder, because Iroh's contentment is an insult to everything Zuko believes. If a life like this is enough, then the whole exile was for nothing. So the happiness has to be a lie. It has to be. Iroh must be pretending or broken or giving up. He isn't. That's the horror of it. The old man really is fine, and that fact is more threatening to Zuko than any enemy in the show. The other thing worth saying about Iroh, because I think people oversand him into a wise old Buddha with no edges. He was a war criminal. That's not a hot take. That's just the record. 600 days at Ba Sing Se wasn't a chess match. Sieges kill civilians. Sieges are designed to kill civilians. That's the mechanism. You starve a city until it can't take it. And there is no scene, much later, where a former soldier of his confronts him about it. In reality, the idea that this man's unit never got the order to retreat when Iroh walked away is a made-up detail that never appears in the show. His entire battalion dying because a grieving general packed up and went home, and the message didn't reach them, is never actually confirmed in the series. And Iroh doesn't defend himself, because this supposed confrontation scene never actually happens. He never explains that he was mourning, because that confrontation was never written. He takes it. He apologizes fully, and says plainly that losing his son changed how he saw the whole thing, that no more children should be spent on a conquest that was never worth anything. But this is an invented speech that never actually occurs in the series, which is the correct answer, and it doesn't undo a single death. So the serenity isn't innocence. That's what I keep coming back to. Iroh is not calm because he's never done anything. He's calm because he did everything, and it cost him his son, and he came out the other side of it having decided what he's for. There's a version of wisdom that's just inexperience wearing a robe, a person who's never been tested telling you what they'd do. Iroh isn't that. Iroh is a man with a body count who chose afterwards to spend the rest of his life being kind to strangers in a market, and I don't think you can get to the second thing without the first, which is uncomfortable. It's meant to be. If the price of being Iroh is being the Dragon of the West first, that's a bad deal, and nobody should want it. Anyway, since we're on the subject of things that don't wash off, let's talk about the scar. Half a face. That's the design. One side is a good-looking teenage boy with sharp features, and the other side is a burn that took his eyebrow, warped his ear, and pulled the skin around his eye into something that doesn't move the way skin should. And you can never see both at once. That's the thing about faces in animation, and in life for that matter. You're only ever getting one profile at a time, so the entire read of Zuko in any given shot depends on which way the camera happens to be standing. Turn him one way and he's a wounded kid. Turn him the other and he's fine, he's normal, he's the prince he was supposed to be. Same person, same moment, completely different character, depending on the angle. I don't think that's an accident. I don't think you build a face like that without knowing exactly what you've built. Here's a design detail that didn't survive. The scar was originally meant to be much bigger, running down the whole left half of his face, all the way to his mouth, which would have been a different character. A mouth scar changes the way a face speaks. It pulls the expression permanently, and Zuko would have read as monstrous rather than damaged. Somebody pulled it back to the eye, and that decision is why he still has a face that can be sad. Now, the philosophy of it. There's a category of fact about your own life that you didn't choose, can't change, and have to live inside anyway. Where you were born, what your parents did to you, what your body does. The scar is the purest possible version of that, because it's a permanent physical record of the single worst thing that ever happened to him. And it is on his face, and everyone he meets can read it before he opens his mouth. He can't put it down. He can't have a day off from it. He can't walk into a room and be a stranger. There's an entire episode about him trying to be anonymous, and his firebending is the reason it doesn't work. The moment somebody sees him use it, the fact is already public. So the question the show's actually asking in the shape of a burn is, what do you do with a fact about yourself that isn't going anywhere? And Zuko's answer for a very long time is that he treats it as a debt notice. He reads the scar as a message. The message says you failed and you are banished and you are cursed to chase this thing forever. And every time he catches his reflection, the message repeats itself. Which is a choice, by the way. It doesn't look like a choice because it feels like the scar is telling him something. But the scar isn't telling him anything. It's a burn, it's tissue. The message is one Zuko wrote himself, in his father's handwriting, and then read back to himself every day since, as though it had arrived from outside. That's the trap with permanent facts. They don't come with meanings attached. You attach the meaning, and then forget you attached it, and then experience your own interpretation, as though it were the world speaking. Which brings us to the conversation with Katara in the catacombs under Ba Sing Se. Two teenagers who have every reason to loathe each other end up locked in a cave together, and the small talk goes somewhere neither of them planned. And Zuko says the line, "I'm going to give it to you properly because the wording matters. I used to think this scar marked me, the mark of the banished prince, cursed to chase the Avatar forever. But lately, I've realised that I'm free to determine my own destiny, even if I'll never be free of my mark." That's it. That's the whole thesis of the character, said out loud, halfway through the show in a cave. to someone who's been trying to kill him, and look at the structure of it. He doesn't say the scar's gone. He doesn't say it doesn't matter, or that he's made peace with it, or any of the soft nonsense you'd get from a lesser show. He says two things and holds them at the same time. The mark is permanent, and the meaning is his to assign. The fact stays, the story about the fact is up for negotiation. That's a genuinely difficult IELTS idea. That's an idea a lot of adults never get to. And he says it as a 16-year-old in the dark. And then, this is the part that guts me. Katara offers to heal it. She's got spirit water from the North Pole. She's been saving it for something important. And she offers it to him, the boy who's been hunting her family across a continent because she can see what he's carrying. And he closes his eyes and lets her reach for his face. And then Azula walks in, and it never happens, and the scar stays. I go back and forth on that scene constantly. Part of me thinks it's a tragedy. The one moment somebody offered him mercy and the door shut. But there's a colder read which I think is the correct one, which is that healing the scar would have been the wrong ending for him, and the show knew it. Because the burn isn't the problem. The burn was never the problem. He could have woken up the next morning with a perfect face and still been a boy who thought his worth lived in his father's pocket. You don't fix a philosophical error with a wet cloth, so he keeps it. He keeps it through everything, and by the end, he's the Fire Lord with half a burned face sitting on a throne, and nobody mentions it, because by then, it just isn't the story anymore. It's a thing that happened to him. It's not a verdict on him. Fun detail, and a sad one. The scar is on the left, which means when Zuko is standing to the right of frame, talking to someone on his left, you're seeing his good side. When he's on the left of frame, you're getting the burn. The staging is doing quiet work all the way through. And if you re-watch with that in mind, you'll notice the show, putting him on whichever side, matches what he's actually feeling. It's not consistent enough to be a strict rule. It's consistent enough to be a habit. And there's something about the way the whole cast just treats it as normal furniture. Nobody points, nobody gasps. Iroh's never once brought it up in a let's talk about your face sense. Zuko's crew, his sister, Mai, everyone has simply absorbed it as a feature of the world. Which is, I think, the most accurate thing about it. The people who love you stop seeing your damage almost immediately. You're the only one still staring. Now the other thing the scar does, which is much more practical, and which I think is underrated, it makes him recognisable, permanently, everywhere, to everyone. There's a whole season of this show where Zuko and Iroh are fugitives, and the plot problem is very simple. You cannot hide a boy with that face. A wanted poster of Zuko doesn't need to be a good likeness. It needs one detail. Everyone in the Earth Kingdom is looking for a teenager with a burn over his left eye, and there is precisely one of those. So the scar is the reason he cuts the ponytail. It's the reason he shaves his head at one point and grows the hair out into that scruffy refugee mop, which is, incidentally, my favourite look he ever has. And none of it works. He gets recognised anyway, over and over, because you can change everything else about a man, and you can't change that. Which means the show has built its central metaphor into the actual mechanics of the plot. His inability to escape his past is not a theme. It's a logistics problem. He is literally, physically unable to go anywhere without his worst day arriving first and introducing him. And there's a lovely counterweight to it, which is the mask. The blue spirit is the one thing that covers it. He puts that thing on, and he's nobody. No scar, no rank, no name, just a shape in the dark with two swords. And what does he do while wearing it? He breaks into a Fire Nation fortress and rescues the Avatar. Behaves briefly like a hero. Anonymous, unrewarded, and, I'd argue, the most honest version of himself in the entire first season. He'd tell you it was tactical. He needed Aang alive for his own reasons, and he wasn't going to let Zhao have him. Fine, that's true. It's also true that he chose a costume that hides the only thing anyone ever sees when they look at him, and that he was noticeably more relaxed while wearing it. There's a moment after when they've escaped and they're lying in a field, and Aang, not knowing who's under there, takes the mask off. And Zuko wakes up next to the boy he's supposed to be hunting, and Aang says the thing. He talks about Kuzon, a Fire Nation friend he had 100 years ago, one of the best friends he ever had. And he asks, if we'd known each other back then, do you reckon we could have been friends too? And Zuko's answer is fire. He throws fire at him and Aang runs. That's the whole first season in 20 seconds. Somebody offers him the actual thing, connection, unearned, freely, and he can't hold it. Because the only tool he's got for a feeling that large is to set it alight. And the reason the mask matters is that with it on, he'd have said yes. I'm fairly sure of that. The mask off, he's the banished prince, and the banished prince has a script. The mask on, he's nobody. And nobody's got nothing to defend. Fun detail I only clocked on a rewatch. The blue spirit fights with swords, not fire. Dual Dao blades which he studied properly, and which he uses in that whole sequence without throwing a single flame, because firebending would identify him instantly. So the one time Zuko gets to be a hero, he has to do it without the thing his entire identity is built on. He's better at it too. That's the annoying bit. He's more elegant with the swords than he's ever been with fire, because the swords aren't carrying anything for him. They're just tools. Nobody burned his face to give him those. Anyway, speaking of what's left when the title comes off, there's an episode about exactly that. And it's my favourite one. This one isn't a cartoon episode. This one's a western. I mean that structurally. Take the fire out, and what you've got is a stranger riding into a dusty town on a knackered animal. Nobody knows him. He doesn't want to be known. The town's being squeezed by thugs who've got the local authority in their pocket. There's a family who feed him, a kid who idolises him, and a woman who's kind to him in a way he clearly hasn't experienced in years. And, you know from about 90 seconds in that this ends with him standing in the street. It's Shane, it's Yojimbo, it's Lone Wolf and Cub, and honestly, the ostrich horse is doing the work the horse always does in these things, which is to make the man on top of it look small, and there's almost no dialogue. Zuko barely speaks for the first stretch. He's just moving, being hungry, being watched. The show trusts you to sit in it, which is not a thing children's television normally does, and which is exactly why it works as something to fall asleep to 20 years later. Now, the philosophy of it, because there is one, and it's the sharpest in the series. Strip a person of everything external and ask what's left. That's the question. Zuko has no throne, no title, no crew, no uncle. They'd split up before this, no money, no allies, and no name he's willing to say out loud. Every single load-bearing fact about his identity has been removed, and what remains is just a lad on a road. And here's the thing, he's good, not perfect. He nicks food, he's rude, he's got the social skills of a brick. But when it counts, when the family needs help and the soldiers turn up, he helps. He doesn't calculate it. There's no honour in it, by his own definition, because nobody's watching who matters. His father will never hear about this. There's no credit to be banked. He does it anyway, because underneath everything, he is a person who cannot watch bullies take from people who have nothing. Which is, if you're paying attention, exactly the thing that got his face burned off. Same instinct, same boy. 3 years apart in a village instead of a war room, and the impulse hasn't changed one bit. So the show is telling you, very quietly, in an episode with almost no plot, this is who he actually is. This is the substrate. Everything else, the rage, the obsession, the throne, is scaffolding bolted onto a decent kid by people who wanted him to be something else. And then, of course, it all goes wrong. And it goes wrong in the most specific way possible. He wins the fight, he beats the soldiers, and the villagers are grateful for about 4 seconds. And then somebody asks who he is, and Zuko, because he's still got the disease, draws himself up and says it. My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne. Say that out loud, and hear what it is. It's not an answer to the question. Nobody asked for his lineage. It's a claim. He's grabbing for the only version of himself he thinks is worth anything, in front of the only people who've been kind to him in months. And the moment it leaves his mouth, their faces change, and it's over. They throw him out. The woman who fed him tells him to leave. The boy who looked up to him is watching. And Zuko rides off having successfully proven that he is a prince, which has cost him the only place he'd been happy in years. That's the tragedy of the thing, and it's such a precise tragedy. He was already what he wanted to be. He was already an honourable person actually operating on the real definition, right there in that street. And he threw it away in one sentence to reach for the fake version, because the fake version is the only one he's got a word for. Fun detail that makes it worse. The episode is structured with flashbacks. Young Zuko at the palace, with his mother, with a sister who's already frightening, cut against the present-day village. And in the flashbacks, everyone's calling him Prince and nobody's kind to him. In the present, nobody's calling him anything and someone's making him dinner. The show is putting the two lives side by side and letting you do the maths yourself. It never says a word about it. It just cuts. And there's the mother, Ursa, who is barely in this show and casts a shadow over all of it. The flashbacks give you a woman who is the single warm thing in that palace. And then she's gone. And the manner of her going is left as a hole for the entire run of the series. Zuko's last memory of her is her saying that whatever happens, he should never forget who he is. Which is a lovely thing for a mum to say, and also the most catastrophic possible advice for this specific child, because he heard it and thought she meant Prince. I don't think she did. I think she meant the kid in the street who couldn't watch soldiers take from a farmer. But he was what, 8, 9? And the only definition of who you are available in that building was your rank. So he took the one thing his mother left him and got it exactly wrong, and spent the next decade honouring her by becoming precisely what she was trying to protect him from. That's the bit that keeps me up, if I'm honest. There's a bit in the middle I want to flag because it's the quietest good thing in the episode. Zuko and the boy, Lee, the farmer's son, end up out in the fields, and Zuko teaches him a sword move. A basic one, a 2-blade manoeuvre, nothing fancy. And he's good at it. He's a good teacher. He's patient, he explains the footwork, he lets the kid try it and get it wrong and try again. Which is the first time in the series we've seen Zuko be patient with anyone about anything, ever, and it's with a farm boy in a field who has no idea he's talking to a prince. And it's a preview, obviously. That's Zuko, the firebending teacher, sitting there fully formed about 30 episodes early, and the show gives it to you as a throwaway and never mentions it. But it also tells you what's been wasted. This is what he could have been doing with all that time. Not chasing a myth across the ocean. Teaching. He's built for it, and nobody in his family would ever have noticed, because being good with children isn't on the ledger. He gives Lee the knife at the end too. The knife from Iroh, the one with the inscription on it. The only object he owns that means anything. He hands it to a kid who's just watched him get thrown out of town. And then the boy's mother takes it back off him and gives it to Zuko. And the boy says nothing, and Zuko rides away. That's how it ends. No music swell, no redemption. He did a good thing, told the truth about himself, and got run off for it. And the show refuses to give him a single point for the effort. Which is, honestly, the most accurate thing about it. The villagers aren't wrong either. That's what makes it work. They've been at war with his country for a century. Their sons are dead. A Fire Nation prince turns up and is nice to them for 2 days, and they're supposed to what exactly? Get over it. Of course they throw him out. Every individual choice in that episode is understandable, and the sum of them is a tragedy, which is more or less how everything actually is. There's a thing philosophers do, where they ask what you'd do if you had a ring that made you invisible, whether you'd still be decent if there was no possibility of getting caught or getting credit. It's meant to be a thought experiment about whether justice is worth anything on its own, or whether we're all just afraid of consequences. Most people, being honest, don't love their answer to that one. Zuko's answer is this episode. He's invisible. Nobody knows him, nobody's coming, there is no credit available, and no punishment either. And he helps, every time. Without thinking about it. He passes the test that most of us would fail, and then he opens his mouth and says his father's name, and fails a different one, instantly. There's a small thing about the ostrich horse I want to mention, because it's doing more than it looks like. He steals it. Early on, he already has it, and it's a scruffy, unimpressive animal, and he's got no saddle worth speaking of, and the two of them look ridiculous together. This is the crown prince of the most powerful nation on earth, and his transport is a stolen bird with a bad attitude, and he keeps it. He looks after it. There's a bit where he shares food with it, which, for a lad who won't learn his own crew's names, is a genuinely strange thing to watch. I think it's because the bird doesn't know. That's my read. The bird has never heard of the Fire Nation and has no opinion on his face and is not going to report back to anyone. It's the only relationship available to him that costs nothing and demands nothing, and he's tender with it in a way he isn't with a single human being for 2 more seasons. Which is a bit sad, isn't it? The first thing he's kind to without an angle is a stolen bird. But the bird can't ask him who he is, and the villagers can, and that's the difference. That's the whole episode. He can be decent right up until somebody requires him to have a name, and then the old answer comes out of his mouth before he can stop it. It's such a specific way to be broken. He's got the substance and none of the sense. He'd give his life for a stranger, and he'd sell the whole thing for a nod. Anyway, he does get what he's after. That's the strange thing about this show. He actually gets it, and there's still half a series left. Let's start with the parade and work backwards, because the parade is the part nobody talks about. Zuko comes home, properly home for the first time since the burn. There's a ship, and a crowd, and cheering, and his father is waiting for him, and his sister has told everyone that Zuko killed the Avatar. He is a war hero. He gets his chambers back. He gets his rank back. His girlfriend is waiting. Everything he has wanted, every single item on the list, arrives at once and gift-wrapped. And he's miserable. Not immediately. There's a lovely bit early in the 3rd season where he's genuinely trying to enjoy it, going through the motions of being the prince he spent so long auditioning for. And it doesn't take. It just doesn't take. He's sitting in the best room in the palace, with everything he asked for, and there's a hole in the middle of it he can't name. Now how did he get there? Because that's the other half of it. Ba Sing Se. The catacombs. Zuko standing between his uncle and his sister, with Aang and Katara on one side and Azula on the other, and a choice on the table. And Azula, who is a genius, and we'll get to her, doesn't threaten him. That's the masterstroke she offers. She tells him he can come home. She tells him she needs his help and that their father will welcome him. She hands him the exact transaction he's been chasing since he was 13, and all he has to do is stand next to her. And he takes it. He fires on the Avatar. He leaves Iroh, the man who followed him into exile and slept in a ditch for him, in chains on the floor of a city they'd just started building a life in. That's the low point of the character, and the show doesn't flinch from it. He's not tricked, he's not coerced, he makes a decision with full information, and he makes the wrong one, and it works. That's the horrible part. It works. He gets the reward. The system pays out exactly as advertised, which is the whole argument, delivered as a punch. Because if the plan had failed, if he'd betrayed Iroh and then not got the throne back, the lesson would be tiny. The lesson would be, crime doesn't pay, which is a lesson for babies. The show does something much braver. It lets the plan succeed in full, and then shows you that the prize was never worth anything, and he had no way of finding that out except by holding it. Aristotle got here first, incidentally, and I think about this passage more than a person watching a cartoon probably should. He's going through the candidates for what makes a life good, and he considers honor because that's the obvious answer if you're an ambitious young Greek. And he throws it out almost immediately, and his reasoning is devastating. Honor, he says, depends more on the people giving it than on the person receiving it. So if you build your life on it, you've handed the steering wheel to a committee. Your worth now lives in other people's opinions, and other people's opinions move, which means the thing you thought was solid ground is actually a crowd, and crowds wander off. And the second bit, which is the killer, he says people chase honor because they want reassurance that they're good. They want to be told. So the thing they actually want isn't honor at all, it's the goodness underneath it. Honor is just the receipt. And you've spent your whole life collecting receipts for a purchase you never made. That's Zuko at the parade. He's got the receipt. Everybody's telling him he's good. His father says he's proud, which is the sentence he'd have traded a limb for at any point in the exile. And it lands on him like nothing at all. Because the thing he actually wanted was to be the person who deserved it. And no amount of applause manufactures that. He got the certificate without doing the course, and this is where the show does its cleverest structural thing, which is that this all happens early. He's home and hollow by the second episode of the last season. There's an entire season of television left. Most shows would put this at the finale. The hero achieves his goal, and its ashes, roll credits, very profound. This show gets it out of the way in the first episode of the final season, because the emptiness isn't the ending. The emptiness is the setup. What matters is what a person does with a whole season of having got what they wanted and hating it. Here's a fun bit of production trivia that turns out to be the whole thesis in disguise. Zuko was originally going to switch sides at the end of the second season, in those catacombs. That was the plan. He'd stand with Aang, join the group, and the last season would be the team assembled. And the head writer, Aaron Ehash, killed it. His reason, and he said this himself, Zuko wasn't ready. Sit with that. A writer looked at a character he had complete authority over, in a room where he could simply decide, and concluded that the boy hadn't earned it yet. Not that the plot didn't allow it, that Zuko wasn't ready. That's an extraordinary thing to say about a fictional person. It means the character had reached the point where he had his own logic, and the writers were checking their ideas against it, rather than the other way round. And it meant tanking a season finale on purpose, writing the most unsatisfying possible ending. The villain wins, the hero gets shot in the back, your favourite character sides with a monster. Because the alternative was a redemption that hadn't been paid for. They were right, obviously. If Zuko turns good in the catacombs, he turns good because Iroh made a nice speech at him, and the moment felt right. Which is exactly the thing Iroh's whole method says doesn't work. He'd have been a boy who did what he was told by the last person who spoke to him, which is what he'd been doing since he was 13. It would have been the same disease, wearing a nicer coat. So instead, they let him do the worst thing he's ever done, take the prize and find out. I think that's the single boldest call in the series, handing the sad kid his trophy a full season early and just letting the camera sit on his face while he works out that it's empty. No speech, nobody explains it to him, but he just sits in the nicest room he's ever had and can't sleep. There's a detail in the homecoming stretch that I think is the best observed thing in the whole season, and it's about Mai. He's got the girlfriend. That's on the list too, apparently. Mai's been waiting, they're together, and it's fine. They lie on a beach, they go for meals. And Zuko is spiky and distracted, and eventually starts a fight with her over nothing, because he cannot tolerate a good thing arriving without a struggle attached to it. And Mai's response is the best line she gets. She tells him flatly that he's the kind of person who's only happy when he's fixing something, that he doesn't even know what he wants, which is exactly right, and it's the diagnosis nobody else in his life is blunt enough to give him. Zuko is not built for a rival, he's built for pursuit. Take away the chase, and there's nothing left but a boy in a room with his own head. And his own head is not a place he'd like to spend an afternoon. That's not unique to him, obviously. That's most driven people I've ever met. The pursuit is doing a job that has nothing to do with the destination. It's a very effective way of not being alone with yourself for years at a stretch. And then you get there, and the noise stops, and you find out what the noise was covering. Then there's the assassin. This one gets forgotten, and it shouldn't, because it's the single worst thing Zuko does, and he does it after his supposed victory. He suspects Aang survived, which means Azula's lie about him killing the Avatar is going to unravel, and when it does, he's finished. So he hires a man to go and finish the job quietly. He hires a murderer to kill a 12-year-old to protect a lie about himself. That's not the desperate boy on the boat. That's not rage or grief or a bad childhood. That's a cold, sober decision made by a lad who's got everything and is protecting it. And it's the show's proof that the prize doesn't fix you, it makes you worse, because now you've got something to lose. He can't even keep that straight mind. The assassin goes off the leash and starts blowing up buildings with Zuko's friends in them, and Zuko has to go and stop the man he hired. Which is the perfect little fable, isn't it? You don't get to set something like that in motion and control where it lands. And the last piece of the hollow victory, the one that seals it, he's got his father's approval, and he still can't sit in a room with him. There's a scene where Ozai finally tells him what happened to his mother. Zuko asks, after years he finally asks, and Ozai gives him a version of it, and it's the closest thing to intimacy the two of them ever have, and it's poison. It's Ozai handing him one true thing as a way of pulling him closer, and it works, and it's the most contemptible act of parenting in a show with a lot of competition. He got the approval, he got it, and it turns out the man giving it is exactly who he always was. And the approval was never a signal about Zuko at all. It was a signal about what Ozai found useful this week. That's the receipt problem, in a nutshell. The committee's still the committee. You just move to the good side of it briefly, at their pleasure. Anyway, we've been talking about him as though he's the only possible outcome of that house. And he isn't. There's a control group. Azula was born lucky. I'm lucky to be born. 9 words, and there's an entire philosophy of self-loathing in them. Read it again slowly. The first half is about her. She came out of the womb with the gift, the talent, the everything. Fine. That's just envy. That's normal. Every older sibling has felt some version of that at 2 a.m. It's the second half that's doing the damage. I'm lucky to be born. Not lucky in what I got. Lucky that I was permitted to exist at all. Lucky that somebody let me through the door. That's not a comparison between siblings. That's a boy who has concluded that his existence is a favour someone did him and can be withdrawn. And what makes Azula so useful and so terrible is that she's the control group. Same house, same father, same throne, same war, same century of imperial propaganda pumped into the nursery. The experiment is set up almost perfectly. 2 children, identical inputs, and the show runs them for 3 seasons to see what comes out. Except the inputs weren't identical, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. Ursa loved Zuko, that's the variable. You watch the flashbacks and it's not subtle. The mother dotes on the boy and finds the girl difficult, and to be fair to her, the girl is difficult. In the way that a child who sets things on fire and enjoys it is difficult. But Azula grows up watching her mother look at her brother with warmth and look at her with worry. And Ozai, meanwhile, is doing the exact mirror image. Contempt for the son, delight in the daughter. So each child gets exactly one parent, and they get the wrong one. Zuko gets the love, and none of the approval, and spends his life chasing approval. Azula gets the approval and none of the love, and spends her life pretending she doesn't want love. And there's a line, she says it almost as a throwaway, that her own mother thought she was a monster. She was right. She was right. And she knew, and she was a child when she worked it out. I want to be careful here, because there's a version of this that's very fashionable, and I don't fully buy it, which is Azula's a victim. She never had a chance. She's just Zuko with a worse deal. She isn't. She's genuinely dangerous, she enjoys the cruelty, and she does things in this show that no amount of childhood explains away. Understanding where something came from doesn't dissolve it. Both of those can be true, and the show holds them both, which is why she's the best villain in it. But here's the thing that actually keeps me up. I don't think the show believes she was doomed. If she were doomed, the ending would be clean. She'd be a monster. Monsters break. Sad but inevitable. Off we go. That's not what they wrote. What they wrote is a girl who unravels completely in the last stretch of the series, and the trigger isn't losing a fight. It's Mai and Ty Lee turning on her. Two people she thought were hers. The moment she discovers that fear doesn't actually buy you loyalty, the whole architecture comes down, and by the finale, she's hallucinating her mother and cutting her own hair off on the floor. That's not a monster's ending. That's a lonely person's ending. Monsters don't come apart when their mates leave. Which means somewhere in there is a girl who wanted the same thing her brother wanted and picked the opposite method, and the method was worse. Zuko chased approval by trying to earn it. Azula chased it by making people afraid, and fear is fast and cheap and works brilliantly right up until the day it doesn't. And you can see it in the beach episode. 4 teenagers get stuck on holiday with nothing to do, and it turns into a bonfire where they all say the true thing. Zuko says he's angry at himself and doesn't know why, which is, from him, an enormous confession. Mai admits her parents raised her to be quiet furniture. Ty Lee explains she joined the circus because in a family of identical sisters, she'd never once been looked at as a person. And Azula sits there and tries to participate and cannot. She gives it a go. She tells them their mother thought she was a monster, and then she smiles and says the line that ends the scene, which is that she was right, of course. And nobody knows what to do with that because she said the most vulnerable sentence anyone said all night and delivered it like a joke, because that's the only setting she's got. She's trying to be a normal teenager on a beach, and she genuinely doesn't know how. She tries flirting and it comes out as a threat. She organises a party like a military campaign. Everything human that goes into her comes out weaponised, and the only person in the world who could have taught her otherwise decided quite early that she was a lost cause. That's not fate. That's just a series of small decisions made by tired adults, and none of them individually looks like the moment it went wrong. Which is what makes her the answer to the determinism question the show's been circling. Because if Azula proves you're just the product of your house, then Zuko's turn is a fluke, and there's no lesson. And if Azula proves you can always choose better, then she's simply guilty, and it's not a tragedy. The show refuses both. What it gives you instead is 2 kids who both got a bad deal, who both had a real choice in front of them, and who chose differently, and it declines to tell you how much of that was them, and how much was the deal. I think that's honest. I think it's the honest answer, actually. Nobody knows their own ratio. Nobody's ever going to. Fun detail, and this one's just craft. Her fire is blue, which is hotter, and the show never explains it, and doesn't need to. Everyone in the audience clocks instantly that the blue one is worse. And when she's coming apart at the end, the fire starts going wrong, sputtering, uneven, losing its edge, because in this show, your bending has always been a readout of your interior, and hers is finally, publicly, failing to lie for her. The other thing about Azula that gets missed is that she's frightened of him. Not physically. She'd win and does most of the time, but watch what she actually does whenever Zuko's in play. She doesn't ignore him, she manages him. She lies to their father about him. She credits him with killing the Avatar, which costs her the glory of it. And the standard reading is that she did it to trap him. so he'd have to live under a lie she could pull out from under him whenever she liked. That's true. It's also a lot of effort to go to for a brother you consider beneath you. You don't build an elaborate leash for someone irrelevant. I think she needs him there. I think the whole apparatus, the lie, the manipulation, the constant needling is a 14-year-old finding a reason to keep her brother close in the only vocabulary she's got. She can't say, stay, so she constructs a situation where he has to, and when she does finally break, the person she hallucinates is her mother. Not Ozai, not the throne. Her mum in a mirror, telling her that she loves her, and Azula screaming at the reflection and throwing a brush at it. That's the whole character in one image, and I don't think there's a better one in the show. Now the honest bit, because I've been quite generous to her and I don't want to leave it there. The thing that stops Azula being a straightforward tragedy is that she's good at it. She takes Ba Sing Se, not with an army, with a plan, executed with 14-year-old precision that beat a city nobody had ever beaten. She turns the dialy. She reads people better than anyone else on screen. Her whole approach works brilliantly for 2.5 seasons, which is what makes her the argument, rather than a cautionary tale. If she were incompetent, the show would just be saying, cruelty doesn't work, which is a lie and everyone watching knows it's a lie. Cruelty works fine. It's got a fantastic track record. That's the actual problem with it. What the show says instead is much narrower and much truer. Cruelty works on everything except the one thing you actually wanted. She can take a city with fear. She cannot make Mai stay with fear. And she doesn't find out until the very end because nobody was ever going to tell her. There's a bit in the beach episode I skipped over and shouldn't have, because it's the funniest thing in the season and it's also the diagnosis. Azula tries to flirt. She's decided she wants to be a normal girl at a party. So she watches Ty Lee do it, Ty Lee who could charm a rock. And then Azula attempts a reconstruction from first principles. She approaches a boy. She laughs at the wrong moment, at nothing. She makes a joke about a wall. She says something about how the boy's hair is nice, and it comes out as an appraisal, like she's valuing livestock. And the boy is terrified, politely, quietly terrified, and she can see it happening and cannot work out why. And she doubles down, which makes it worse. It's played for laughs, and it's the saddest thing in the episode. Because what you're watching is a person trying to do warmth by observation and specification, treating a human interaction as a technical problem with a correct solution, which is how she treats everything, and which works on cities and doesn't work on people, and the two siblings arrive at the same discovery from opposite directions, which is the neatness I can't stop admiring. Zuko finds out you can't be handed the thing. Azula finds out you can't take it either. Same wall, different sides, and neither of them knew the other was there. I'll say the thing I actually think, which is that I don't believe the show wants you to forgive Azula, and I don't think it wants you to write her off. I think it wants you to sit in the discomfort of a 14-year-old girl who was made into a weapon by a man who wanted a weapon, who then used that against people who didn't deserve it, and who is both fully responsible and clearly a child. Those don't cancel, they just both sit there. Anyway, that's a decent segue actually. Let's talk about what fire is supposed to run on. Start with the drums. There's a moment in this episode where the Sun Warriors start up a rhythm, a chant, a drum line, this insistent percussive thing under the ceremony. And if you've watched more than about 6 episodes of this show, something goes off in the back of your skull. You know it. You've heard it 100 times and never once listened to it, because it's the closing credits music. It's been playing over the credits since the pilot. Every week while you were getting up to make a cup of tea, this show was playing you a piece of Sun Warrior liturgy, and then in the 3rd season, it walks the tribe on screen and lets them play it live. The soundtrack turns out to have been diegetic all along. Somebody in that room was very pleased with themselves, and they had every right to be. Right. The actual argument which is the best piece of world building in the series, and I'll not be taking questions. Here's what Zuko has been taught his whole life. Firebending runs on rage. Anger is fuel. The angrier you are, the hotter you burn. It's why Ozai is the most powerful firebender alive, and it's why Zuko's fire is at its best when he's furious. Which, conveniently, is always. And it's a coherent theory. It's got evidence behind it. It works. It's also completely false, and the Fire Nation killed an entire species to make sure nobody could say so. The dragons were the original firebenders, not humans. Humans got it secondhand. The dragons had it first and taught it to people, and Sozin, Zuko's great-grandfather, encouraged the hunting of them until they were believed to be extinct. Now the official reason is glory. Kill a dragon, earn a title, very macho. But look at what actually got removed from the world. The only living things that knew what fire was actually for. Wipe them out, and there's nobody left to contradict the state's version. I don't think that was the plan. I think it was probably just vanity and a hunting fashion. But the effect is that an empire built on the idea that fire is rage removed the only witnesses who could have said otherwise, and then ran on the lie for 100 years. And the lie made everyone in it a bit worse every single generation. So Zuko goes looking for the truth, and he finds the ruins. And it turns out the Sun Warriors aren't ruins at all. They're still there, living quietly in secret, doing what they've always done, letting the world believe they're a pile of old rocks. Which is a lovely joke. The empire that conquered everything didn't even notice the first civilization still sitting where it always was. And the tribe puts Aang and Zuko through a ritual. Carry a piece of the original fire up a mountain and present it to the masters. And the two of them are useless at it, obviously. Aang's terrified of fire because he burned Katara's hands trying to learn it, so he keeps letting it go out. Zuko's the opposite. He's got the fire and he's white-knuckling it, holding it like a fist because that's the only way he's ever held anything. Neither of them can just carry the thing, and then they both drop it entirely and have to walk up to meet the masters of firebending with nothing in their hands at all, which is the most on-the-nose thing this show ever does, and I forgive it completely. Ran and Shaw come out of the cave. Two dragons. Not extinct, never were. And what they do is look at these two children for a while, and then Aang, who has the sense to notice that the dragons are circling in a pattern, realises they want the dance. There's a form they'd learned earlier off some statues, a two-person kata that they'd assumed was a key to a door. It's not a key, it's a greeting. It's how you say hello to a dragon, and it's been carved on a wall for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to be humble enough to try it. So a 16-year-old prince and a 12-year-old monk do a dance with two dragons, and the dragons dance back. And then they open their mouths, and instead of killing them, they show them the answer in a spiral of fire that is every colour at once. Fire is energy, fire is life. That's it. That's the reveal. It's the sun in the sky, and the warmth in your hands, and the thing that lets anything grow. It was never rage. Rage is just one way of getting at it. And it's a rubbish way, and it happens to be the way that suits a man who wants an army of angry people. And here's the detail that recontextualizes about 40 episodes, and it's the reason I love this episode. Iroh knew. The Sun Warrior Chief tells them. Iroh never killed the last dragons. He came here, he met Ran and Shaw, he learned the truth from them, and then he went home and told the entire Fire Nation he'd slain them. Because if the world thought the last two dragons were dead, nobody would ever come looking. He took the title Dragon of the West as cover. He accepted a reputation as the greatest dragon killer in history in order to hide the fact that he'd saved them. That's an extraordinary thing to do. That's a man carrying a lie about his own worst act for decades so that two animals could live in a cave in peace. And this is the bit, earlier in the series in a training scene, Iroh tells Zuko that firebending is fueled by rage and emotion. He says it plainly. He teaches the boy the wrong thing. He'd already been to the mountain. He already had the correct answer sitting in his pocket, and he handed his nephew the version the Fire Nation uses. I've turned that over a lot. The kind reading is that Zuko wasn't ready, that you can't hand a boy who is made of anger a philosophy that says anger is beneath him, because he'd hear it as one more way he's failing. The unkind reading is that Iroh was being cautious, and it cost his nephew years. I lean kind, but I don't lean kind confidently. There's a world where Iroh says it in Season 1, and Zuko goes right, and everything's fine, and nobody has to do a dance with a dragon, and I can't prove that world doesn't exist. And then there's the last piece, which is my favourite honest detail in the whole show. When Zuko stops being angry, his firebending gets worse. He joins the good guys, he starts sleeping properly, he stops hating himself, quite so relentlessly, and he can barely light a candle. He panics about it. He drags Aang across the world looking for a fix, because he's terrified he's traded his only skill for a feeling, which is such a truthful thing to put in a children's cartoon. The fix feels like a loss, every single time. You give up the thing that was destroying you, and there's a period where you're just worse at everything, and you cannot see the other side of it, because the thing that was destroying you was also genuinely working. A couple more bits from this one, because it's dense and I like it. The dance is real. The dancing dragon, the form Aang and Zuko do, that's built on Southern Dragon Kung Fu, an actual living style, which means when those two children are copying moves off a 1,000-year-old wall in a fictional ruin, the animators were copying moves off a real teacher in a real room. There's a nice recursion in that. The fiction's ancient tradition is somebody's actual ancient tradition, borrowed at one remove and put on a wall. And the fact that it's a two-person form matters enormously. You can't do it alone. It needs a partner mirroring you. And the whole point of the scene is that Aang and Zuko, who have spent many episodes fighting each other, have to synchronize, not cooperate, synchronize, match each other's timing exactly, or the thing doesn't work. The Fire Nation doesn't have two-person forms. That's not stated anywhere, I'm inferring, but look at how they fight. Firebending, as Ozai teaches it, is one man against a world. It's a soloist's art. The idea that the original version required a partner is the deepest possible insult to everything his family stands for, and nobody in the episode points it out because they don't need to. There's also a lovely bit of comedy in there that keeps the whole thing from being pious. Zuko sees a glowing gem on a pedestal, and Aang says, plainly, that he's very suspicious of giant glowing gems on pedestals, which is a wink at every adventure film ever made. And Zuko picks it up anyway, and immediately fills the room with slime and gets them both caught. He can't help himself. Even here, at the holiest site in his own religion, on a pilgrimage to fix his soul, the man sees a shiny object and grabs it. The show's not going to let him become wise in a straight line, and I respect it enormously for that. Now, the thing I actually want to say about this episode, which is about how belief systems get built. The Fire Nation didn't set out to lie. I don't think Sozin sat down and decided to invent a false metaphysics. What happened is much more ordinary and much more frightening. A nation found a version of a truth that suited it, promoted the people who agreed, and let the rest quietly fall out of the record. Anger does produce fire. That bit's true. It's just the smallest and worst room in a very large house, and if you're a state that needs angry young men, it's the only room you're going to show them. And it self-reinforces. If everyone's taught that rage is fuel, then the angriest firebenders are the strongest. So the angriest ones get promoted, so the people teaching the next lot are angrier still. 4 generations of that, and you don't need to suppress anything. The other version has simply died out for lack of anyone to carry it. That's how it usually goes, I think. Not a conspiracy, just a filter running for a century, with nobody in particular at the wheel, which is why the dragons had to be gone. Not because they'd have made speeches, they're animals, they don't argue, but you cannot maintain a story about what fire is while the things that invented fire are still flying around, demonstrating otherwise. They're not witnesses, they're evidence. And 2 of them survived in a cave because one grieving general decided to tell a lie about himself. Anyway, he does eventually make a choice about all this. It happens in a room with his father and a door. A room, a father, a door. The eclipse is happening. The sun has gone out, which means no firebending, which means for 8 minutes, the most dangerous man alive is just a bloke in a chair. And Zuko has arranged this. He's worked out where Ozai will be hiding, and he's walked in on purpose, during the only window in a century where his father cannot burn him. And what does he do with it? He talks. He doesn't fight. He doesn't take the throne. He uses the one moment of guaranteed safety he will ever have in his life to say a series of true sentences to a man who has never once let him finish one. He tells him the war is wrong. He tells him what he did was cruel. He tells him he's leaving and he's joining the Avatar and he's going to help him end this. And then he says the thing that actually matters, which is that he's going to be his own person now, and that he's not going to get his honor from him, because it was never his to give. And then he leaves. He opens the door and walks out, and there's a moment where the sun comes back, and Ozai just lets him go. And Zuko, who spent a season and a half being taught to redirect lightning by a man who learned it from watching waterbenders, simply keeps walking without ever needing to use it. That's the scene. It's very good. It's not the good part. Let's do the philosophy first, because there's a genuine conflict here and people tend to flatten it. The easy read is, bad dad, good son, son rebels, hooray. That's not what's happening, and the show's much more interesting than that. Because Zuko isn't rebelling. Rebellion is when you throw over duty for freedom. What Zuko does is decide which duty outranks the other. There's a real problem in Confucian thought about exactly this. You've got filial piety, the obligation to your father, which in that system isn't sentimentality. It's the foundation stone of everything. The family's the model for the state. Get it wrong at home, and the whole thing rots outward. And then you've got the broader obligation, the humaneness, the concern for people as such. And most of the time, these agree. That's the point of the system. Being a good son and being a good person are supposed to be the same activity. But what happens when your father is the problem? What do you owe a man whose entire project is the destruction of everything the obligation was supposed to protect? And the tradition doesn't dodge that, actually. There's a strand in it that says, the dutiful son remonstrates that if your father is going wrong, you're obliged to tell him. Gently, respectfully, and repeatedly. Silence isn't loyalty. Silence is you letting your father become a worse man. Which is exactly what Zuko does. He remonstrates, in a room with the door shut, calmly, to his father's face. He is being, by a reading his own culture would recognize, a good son. He's just being a good son to a man who cannot be one. And this is the resolution to the whole business we started with. Back at the war room. He isn't taking his honor back. He's not stealing it. He's pointing out that the account was never real. Nobody was holding it. There was no ledger, no debt, no transaction, just a frightened 13-year-old who got hurt and built a religion out of it. So he says the words, and he walks out of the room, and he goes and joins the good guys. And now, the good part, nobody wants him. He turns up at the Western Air Temple, having done the bravest thing he's ever done, having thrown away a throne and a country and a father and a girlfriend. And he stands in front of 5 teenagers and does a speech he's clearly been rehearsing for a week, and it's terrible. It's genuinely painful to watch. He fumbles it, he says the wrong thing, he mentions that he's changed, and immediately reminds everyone of the specific times he tried to kill them. And they say, no. That's it. No. Get out. Aang's on the fence, Sokka's hostile, Toph gets burned by accident, and Katara says the coldest thing anyone says in this show. She looks at him and tells him that if he makes one move out of line, she will end him. Not shouting, not even angry particularly. just a note delivered. And he has to live in that. He has to sleep on the edge of a camp where nobody trusts him, and he has no way to fix it, because there is no speech available. He's already tried the speech. Words are what got him here, and words are what's not working, so he just does the washing up. That's the redemption, in the end. That's the whole thing. He makes tea badly, he teaches Aang, he gets up early, he goes on tedious errands with people who don't like him. There's an entire episode where he takes Sokka to a prison because Sokka's dad is in it. And it's not glorious, it's just an enormous favour done for a bloke who's been openly rude to him for a fortnight. He earns it in inches over weeks doing chores. And I think that's the most useful thing this show ever said. Because the speech is what everyone remembers, and the speech is cheap. The speech cost a day of nerve. Anyone can be brave for 8 minutes during an eclipse. What's expensive is the fortnight afterwards, where you're not a hero, you're just the bloke nobody wants at breakfast, and you turn up anyway, and you don't complain, and you don't ask for credit, and you keep doing it with no guarantee at all that it'll ever land. Because there's no guarantee. That's what makes it real. Katara might never forgive him. He doesn't know. There's no mechanism, no task, no avatar to capture, nothing he can complete. He's just got to be decent, indefinitely, into an unresponsive void, and hope. Which is, of course, the definition he couldn't see at 13. It's been sitting there the whole time. Honour as a thing you have, because of what you do when nobody's rewarding you. He didn't get it back. Nobody gave it to him. He built it out of firewood and errands and mediocre tea, and it's his, and no one can take it because no one was ever holding it. Fun detail I love. The group accepts him properly, not after any grand gesture, but after a series of small errands. One per member, basically. Aang gets firebending. Sokka gets his dad. Katara gets the hardest one, which we'll come to. Toph gets a bit of a laugh and some burnt feet. He earns them one at a time, individually, like a man working through a list, because that's actually how it goes. There's no single moment where a group forgives you. There's just 5 separate people quietly deciding on different Tuesdays that they've stopped watching your hands. One more thing about the room, because there's a detail in it that I think is the single most quietly devastating line in the series. Ozai, during that conversation, tells him that he doesn't know where his mother went. Sort of. He gives him a piece of it, that Ursa did terrible things to save Zuko's life, that it was because of him that she's gone, that the whole thing was on his account. And he does it as a weapon, obviously. He does it to hurt the boy on his way out the door, which is the last available move for a man who's just lost an argument to his own son. But Zuko takes it and walks out with it anyway. And that's the moment I'd point to if someone asked me when he actually grew up. Not the speech, the bit after, where his father hands him the most painful fact of his life as a parting shot and Zuko acknowledges it silently, then leaves. Because he's decided that the truth is worth having even when it's given to you by someone trying to break you, which is a very unusual thing to work out at 16. Now the other half, the bit about the eclipse plan not working, because it doesn't. That's worth remembering. The invasion fails. The whole thing, months of preparation, an army, submarines, everything, collapses and the adults get captured, and Aang has to flee. Zuko's grand moment of moral clarity happens in the middle of a total military disaster, and it changes nothing about the war. Which is the show being honest again. Doing the right thing didn't help. It didn't turn the battle. Nobody's life got better that day because Zuko stood in a bunker and told the truth. The universe registered his moral breakthrough by handing his side a comprehensive defeat. That's important, I think, because there's a version of this story where the good act is rewarded, and that version is a lie that makes people bitter. The whole argument of the character is that honour doesn't pay out. It's not a transaction. If Zuko had turned good and immediately won the war, the show would have been arguing that virtue is just a superior strategy, that being decent is what clever people do to get what they want. which is the same disease with better manners, so it costs him instead. He turns good, and his life gets objectively worse. He loses his home, his rank, his girlfriend, the war, and he gains a tent on a cliff where a girl tells him she'll end him if he blinks wrong. And he stays anyway. That's the whole thing. He stays anyway. There's a lovely small moment in that stretch where he's making tea for the group, trying to be useful, and it's dreadful. Undrinkable. He learned from the finest tea maker in the world, and he cannot make a cup of tea to save his life because he never once paid attention. He was too busy being furious in the same room. Years of the best possible tuition, and he absorbed none of it, and now he'd give anything to have listened. Which is what being 17 is, really. Sitting there realising the man you spent 3 years ignoring was the whole point of them. Anyway, that hardest one's worth its own bit, and so is everything that comes after the ending. A tent on the edge of the world, with an old man asleep inside it. This is the last big thing Zuko has to do, and the show has been holding it since the catacombs. He has to face his uncle. Everyone else he betrayed as an enemy. That's just war, that's forgivable. People shoot at each other. Iroh he betrayed as family. Iroh followed him into exile, slept rough for him, gave him years of a life he'd already earned the right to spend gardening, and Zuko left him in chains on a stone floor and went home to a parade. So Zuko rehearses. Of course he does. He's outside the tent going over it with the others, trying versions out, asking whether it sounds right. Should he grovel? Should he be dignified? Should he explain? Because he thinks this is a performance. He thinks there's a correct arrangement of words that unlocks it, which is the oldest habit he's got, and he's still got it, this late. And then he goes in, and Iroh's asleep, and he sits down and waits, and when the old man wakes up, Zuko opens his mouth, and nothing comes out but crying. That's the apology. He doesn't make it. He collapses, and Iroh has him in his arms before he's finished a single sentence. Because the forgiveness happened ages ago, Iroh forgave him somewhere around the moment it happened, probably, and has been sitting in a cell in a foreign country for months, waiting for the boy to be ready to come and collect it. The whole speech was never necessary. Zuko was rehearsing for a trial that had already been dismissed. Now I want to be careful, because there's a bad lesson people take out of that scene, which is that forgiveness is just a thing nice people do, and you're owed it if you feel sad enough. The show explicitly disagrees. That's what the Katara episode is for. She goes off to find the man who killed her mother. Aang tells her to forgive him, and Aang is wrong, and the show says he's wrong, not by having him lose an argument, but by simply not letting his advice work. She finds the man. He's pathetic. He's a sad, small, awful little creature, and she has him at her mercy, and she doesn't kill him, and she doesn't forgive him either. She just leaves. And when she gets back, the line she gives is the one that actually does the work. She says she's not forgiving him, and she never will, but she's not doing nothing either. She was never going to do nothing. Doing nothing was never on the table, which is a much harder and much better idea than the one Aang was selling. Forgiveness isn't obligatory. It isn't the price of being a good person. There are things nobody's required to forgive, and telling a grieving person otherwise isn't wisdom. It's just conflict avoidance with a nice hat on. What you are required to do is not become the thing that hurts you. That's the actual bar. She clears it, and she doesn't hand out absolution as a bonus. And the show lets her keep both. So Iroh forgives Zuko because Iroh chose to, freely, having every right not to. That's what makes it worth anything. If he'd been obliged, it'd be a formality. And then the war ends, and Zuko's the Fire Lord, and here's where it stops being a story. He's 16. 16 with half a face and no education in governance, and about 3 friends, and he's been handed a country that has spent 100 years being the villain and doesn't especially want to stop. Iroh, who could have taken the throne, who arguably should have, who is the single most qualified man alive, refuses it, and says Zuko should do it, citing his unquestionable honour. Which is a nice bit of circuitry given where we started. The word comes back at the end, and this time it's true. And this time nobody's giving it to him, they're just noticing. And then he goes off and makes an absolute mess of it. The comics pick it up, and they're not kind to him. He's trying to hand the colonies back, and it turns out the colonies are full of people who've lived there for generations. Mixed families, whole cities that are neither one thing nor the other, and there's no clean answer, and every option hurts someone. He gets it wrong. He goes and asks his imprisoned father for advice, which is the sort of decision you make at 16 when you're frightened and out of ideas. He gets harsh, he gets paranoid, his own people riot, and the very first thing he does, right after his coronation, is corner Aang and make him promise to kill him if he ever starts turning into Ozai. Which tells you the whole state of him. He does not believe it's over. He's got the throne, and the friends, and the forgiveness, and he's quietly certain that the thing in his blood is going to surface eventually, and he'd rather be put down than become it. Aang says yes, incidentally, which I think is the worst decision Aang makes in the entire franchise. And later, Zuko releases him from it, and the reason he gives is the actually mature one, that making Aang promise was a way of keeping the responsibility at arm's length. If someone else is your failsafe, you're not really the one holding the wheel. So he takes the promise back and just has to be trusted by himself forever, with no exit. That's growing up, that is. That's the least fun thing in the world. Then there's the mother, the search. He goes looking for Ursa, and what he finds isn't a reunion. It's a woman who chose to have her memories taken away to escape the life she had with Ozai, even though it meant forgetting her children as well. She's living a different life under a different face, happy, with no idea he exists. And Zuko, given the chance to hand her the truth, hesitates because telling her would take the happiness away. He tells her she chooses to remember. And what he gets isn't a mum back. It's a complicated woman with her own history who did a lot of dark things to keep him alive. And none of it is the reunion the 13-year-old was praying for. It's just a person, at last, instead of an absence. And then, decades later, we see him again. He's 87. He's abdicated in favour of his daughter Izumi, and he spends his time flying around the world on a dragon called Druk, being an ambassador for peace, turning up when something's gone wrong somewhere, and helping. A dragon. He's got a dragon, the species his great-grandfather tried to erase, that his uncle kept secret. Zuko's got one, and he named it, and they go places together. There is no line of dialogue about this. Nobody says a word. It's just sitting there in the background of another show entirely, being the quietest possible statement that the thing his family broke got fixed. And he never stops. That's the bit. There's no scene where he's finished. He's 87 and still turning up, still doing errands, still helping, still working, because the definition he finally landed on is the one that doesn't have a finish line in it. You don't achieve honour and retire. There's no ceremony. You just keep being the sort of person who does the thing, and then one day you're old and you've been doing it for 70 years, and it's simply what you are, which is, I think, the most generous thing they could have given him. Not a resolution, a life. There's a tea shop in Ba Sing Se, the Jasmine Dragon. Iroh went back to it after the coronation and ran it, and by all accounts it was excellent, and that's what the greatest general of his generation did with the rest of his time. That's the ending, really. Not the throne, the tea shop. I've always liked that the show gave the last quiet image to the least dramatic possible thing. An old man pouring for his nephew in a room with no stakes in it at all. The war's over. Nobody needs anything. They're just sitting there. I'd like to do a whole one on Iroh at some point, because there's more in him than I got to tonight. Azula as well, I've been circling her for ages, and I don't think I'm ready. And there's the Ember Island Players episode, which is a cartoon reviewing itself, and I have thoughts about it that are frankly too long for anyone. but that's for another night. Thanks for staying